read an article last week on Vice by Matthew Gault called Why Fortnite and Apex Legends Top Players Keep Colluding. A link to that article is in the description box of this video, and I highly encourage you to read it. The basic premise is that these games create an elite class at the top. This is created by skill-based matchmaking and the tier system and rankings. This elite class then takes on characteristics that look a lot like other classes we see in society. Those that have want to keep having, so they will do what it takes to stay there. In a lot of cases, this means hard work, but in many other cases, this means cheating. The article was mostly focused on Apex Legends and its most recent teaming scandal, so I encourage you to check that out. But I wanted to continue my look at Fortnite, one, because I am more familiar with the personalities in that community, and two, I die off spawn almost every time in Apex. So,
and here we go.
In the Fortnite world, a battle has steadily been ramping up, especially in light of the FNCS Grand Finals and its outcome. On the surface, it has been a battle between controller players and keyboard and mouse players. Switch and mobile players get no love. If we take a look at this situation on its face, it appears clear. There has been a drastic shift in tournament results for many of the top players in the world. Many keyboard and mouse players are seeing their positions taken by controller players. Simple enough. That old guard, if it's fair to call 16-year-olds old guard in anything, is starting to see their power in this game sift through their fingers. This is the tried and true tribalism playing out in new, economically divisive ways. As the article makes clear, it's not just game power that is at stake. There is tournament money, a lot of it. There are endorsements, there are streaming deals, there are stream subscriptions and fandom. And the thing is, those that were at the top before got in on the ground floor with all of these things. Look at Booga, one of the most vocal critics of the state of controller play in competitive Fortnite, and the first Fortnite World Cup champion, which came with a $3 million prize. He then had a Super Bowl spot with Sabra. His Twitch following exploded after his World Cup experience. He had an interview with Jimmy Fallon. There was a docuseries. There were articles. All of this meant money and exposure. But without wins, his following might drop. His earnings might drop. No more Super Bowl ads. These resources begin to vanish. This is something many of the top Fortnite players have begun to feel. Even without all the things Booga experienced, there is a lot of influence and money on the table for them. All of these things replicate real-world capitalist responses to resource management. Those that have try to keep what they have, while those below them try to fight their way into that group. But the way this plays out in games like Fortnite and like Apex Legends, which have rich competitive scenes, is interesting, but also predictable. We've started to see players begin policing who gets to be part of these elite groups through Discord servers where top players scrim against each other. And through Twitter and other social media platforms, the old guard has taken to calling out those they see as a threat or unworthy to their position, both keeping them from these scrims and calling them cheaters. Many of the top players have also started posting their tier maker lists, which rank players into categories. The assumption here is that the elite and the great are fit for inclusion, and anything less is not. A lot of this has been to troll other players or farm impressions on Twitter, but if ignored, then the implications and ties to those that are not part of this group is lost. Those that follow these players end up siding and creating their own understanding of exclusivity within the game and its community, and that can often create issues for the game itself. But we've also seen some of the top controller players from that old guard side with the top players from keyboard and mouse. If they had been accepted by the group previous to this development, they are more inclined to keep their position than to side with the incoming guard. Again, tribalism begins to take over. Aside from policing exclusivity in this group, there have also been scandals involving that exclusivity. Most recently, Creo, Bucky, Keys, and Slacks all got caught during the FNCS Invitational for teaming. A year ago, XXIF or Ziff was disqualified from the World Cup final for colluding. And while Fortnite is much more open to all players achieving the highest ranks than Apex Legends, say, which limits its top tier to 500 players, there is still this fight for preservation. What we've got here is complicated when we view through this capitalist lens. On one hand, we've got teenagers, for the most part, replicating the same trends of the CEOs, politicians, and multi-billionaire elite capitalist class. We've also got a bunch of kids who are privileged enough to play video games for a living, and make no doubt there is privilege here. But the fact of the matter is that these kids and most of their families are not part of that elite ruling class, but their attempts to police the forum in which they operate create the same scenarios that play out in boardrooms and state and national legislatures. As Galt says in the article, quote, "Why do this? There are a number of reasons, but it boils down to the fact that these matchmaking systems end up creating and defining an elite class of players who suddenly discover they have common class interests. If nothing else, having put in all the work to become top-tier players, they dread being kicked out of the club. If you're in that tier, there's an incentive to collaborate with other top-tiered players to keep out the competition and continue playing with people you regard as your peers." And so we've seen this play out both in actual cheating scandals of collusion, but then we've also seen this in the elite players trying to police who comes into the group and who they're willing to collaborate with becomes much smaller. In the real world, these issues have been seen time and time again. Many of the labor laws we have now were created because of this type of exclusion and policing of access. A famous example is Major League Baseball at the turn of the 20th century. Owners held exclusive rights to their players and could essentially pay them nothing. But as players began to fight back for inclusion into this club, owners would retaliate. This is one of the key reasons for the 1919 Black Sox scandal, where the team threw the World Series for assurance of a decent payday from bettors. Politicians, on the other hand, create laws and opportunities that enrich themselves, but do little for the common person. This has been seen recently with stock sales by politicians right before the COVID-19 pandemic. CEOs have amazingly robust and rich incentive packages while their workers work for minimum wage. And the excuse for this type of behavior is often meritocracy, where those that have merit will get their just rewards. But those that create the system in the first place are its gatekeepers, so the most qualified people may not get in. One of the great myths of the United States and of the world has been meritocracy. But video games have an opportunity to make meritocratic culture true. There's a long way to go, though, especially if the people exacerbating the worst of these capitalist tendencies are unaware that they are doing so. Women still need to be more readily included in conversations about gaming. People of color are missing from many of these leaderboards. Issues of access, issues of exclusivity do not imply malintent, but they could point to deeper problems within the society in which these games exist. But what do you think? Have you been following the KBM controller feud on Twitter or Instagram? Does it create a toxic environment around the game? What could be done to fix it? Let me know in the comments, and until next time.